What's up, everyone? It's your host, Matt James, and welcome to Generation Bitcoin. Today I'm here with Tomer Strolight. How are you doing today, Tomer?
I'm doing great.
Thanks for coming on. I'm super excited to have you on. You're the co-host of For the Love of Bitcoin podcast, and you're a writer on Medium. Can you go into a little bit more about what you're doing and where you come from?
Sure. As you said, I have my own podcast, which is called For the Love of Bitcoin. It's a pretty hardcore Bitcoin podcast. We kind of call it the podcast of the self-sovereign software movement. So it's not just about Bitcoin. It's really about the politics behind Bitcoin and the freedom movement and the spirit and the love of Bitcoin, which is why it's named that way. And there's quite a few episodes where we just talk about how much we really love different aspects of Bitcoin. And my co-hosts are a guy who goes by the name of Bitcoin Granny. His real name is Keith Levine. He is one of the original members of The Clash. He's a real punk, even before the cypherpunks existed, and he was the original guitarist as well for Public Image Limited, Pill, which was another great punk band of the punk era. And my other co-host is a guy who goes by the name of Bitcoin Mechanic, and he's been around the circuit quite a bit too. Also a musician, so I'm not a musician, but the other two of my co-hosts are, and we have a very broad age range between us, and we talk about how Bitcoin affects us and how we see it affecting the world. And then I've been writing about Bitcoin publicly for most of this year. I've written a series that was turned into a small ebook called Why Bitcoin, the series. Guy Swan's read some of them. It's available as an electronic download on swanbitcoin.com/whybitcoin. It's also available on my Medium. And I've written lots of other articles. I've written a series about Bitcoiners called Who Are the Bitcoiners, which has a few articles about who Bitcoiners are and what it means to be a Bitcoiner. And then I have a whole other series of articles that I'm still in the middle of writing right now that are what I call deep takes on Bitcoin. And they talk about how Bitcoin, they talk about all kinds of different things, why Bitcoin is comparable to alien technology and why it has an ability to think and all kinds of really interesting things. So those are all at tomerstrolight.medium.com. And I know today we're going to discuss a few of the pieces from my original series, Why Bitcoin, which were all, it was a series of articles that looked at Bitcoin from a different facet in each article. And each article, my goal was to make it only 3 minutes long, to make it suitable for newcomers, but to also add something to people who were experienced Bitcoiners who hadn't thought of Bitcoin maybe yet in this way, to provide a fresh take on Bitcoin that anyone could appreciate.
Yeah, your articles are really great. What exactly, if you can briefly tell me, what inspired you to write all these articles on Medium about Bitcoin, and why did Bitcoin appeal to you so much when you found out about it?
It's a great question. The last podcast I did on For the Love of Bitcoin was a couple of us asking ourselves what caused us to fall so deep down the rabbit hole, and it's hard to know exactly. I think I've told this biographical story in a couple of other podcasts, so I don't want to retell it for people who are just here to listen to the reading of the articles. But I found everything about Bitcoin fascinating when I first heard about it in 2013, and it was something that could be all the money in the world. It was something that could be free from government corruption, and in that sense, it was something that could be a real tool for freedom. And people who go into my work will realize that I write a lot about it. There's one article I wrote recently called "What is the Essence of Bitcoin?" And I said it's an enforcement mechanism for morality. Like the laws of morality is a code of behavior that people can break. You can steal, you can kill, you can forcibly take things away. But Bitcoin has a code of ethics that corresponds to you should not lie, you should not steal, and it's actually unbreakable. You cannot steal Bitcoin. You cannot tell a lie about which Bitcoins you are in possession of and exist without it being caught out and verified. You cannot pretend to be Satoshi Nakamoto and not be called out and proven a liar. So it's this tremendous invention that for the first time ever, those things that all of us know to be fair and right and moral, except for perhaps the most pathological of us, have something to hold on to that is inviolable in that realm. I think that's what I was being drawn towards the whole time.
For sure. Awesome. Well, let's get straight into the articles then. So I wanted to do three of your articles from your Why Bitcoin series. I think the first two kind of address, two common pieces of FUD that you hear about Bitcoin being volatile and Bitcoin being going to be stopped by the government in the future. A lot of people think those. So let's go ahead and get right into those. If you can start with the why Bitcoin is the path to economic stability.
Oh, so it's my pleasure to read this. So this is an article I wrote at the end of March of 2021, which is this year for people listening to this fresh. Why Bitcoin is the path to economic stability. Bitcoin is extremely volatile, say the journalists, economists, and bankers. Is it though? If you were on a boat that was being tossed about by rough seas and were looking out at a lighthouse on the shore, that lighthouse's position would appear extremely volatile. But here's why Bitcoin is like that lighthouse. Bitcoin is profoundly stable. Everything about Bitcoin's operation is actually perfectly stable. The supply of coins is issued precisely in the quantity and exactly according to the schedule that was set out on its launch. Bitcoin remains fully operational with not a single second of downtime in the last 8 years and only 2 downtime events in its entire existence. Every critical aspect of Bitcoin, like its decentralization, remains in place and only gets stronger over time. No matter what the world has thrown at it, Bitcoin has kept all its promises. 1. It has prevented Bitcoins from ever being misspent or respent. 2. It has issued a precisely predictable supply. 3. It has allowed owners to spend coins without restriction. 4. It has allowed anyone in the world to use Bitcoin. And 5, it has allowed anyone in the world with a basic computer to verify all of these facts for themselves without having to trust anybody else. There have been no exceptions. How could anyone call this volatile? Bitcoin's adoption is a mass migration towards its stability. When critics call Bitcoin volatile, it is not meant to be a compliment. They are implying that stability is preferable to volatility. This much is correct. They are just mistaken about what stability is. Bitcoin's incredible stability and reliability, as described above, is precisely what is attracting such large and growing numbers of people, corporations, institutions, and governments to adopt it in ever greater degrees. As Bitcoin adoption increases, its value, as measured in dollars, rises profoundly, albeit with wild short-term fluctuations, as markets try to figure out just how valuable it is becoming. What's volatile is national currencies. The worst of the national currencies around us are in a state of collapse. Venezuela's bolivar has lost 99% of its value against the US dollar in just a year at the time of this writing. However, even the British pound has experienced 17% volatility in ups and downs relative to the US dollar in the same 1-year period. Now, if we hold national currencies up to the standard of stability described above, none even offer any of Bitcoin's promises. 1. None offer any promises of predictability of supply, and many, including the dollar, have seen massive supply increases in recent times. 2. None are entirely resistant from being seized by crooks or authorities. 3. None offer their holders unrestricted permission to use them. Regulations exist that require owners to identify themselves and declare their uses for values above certain thresholds. 4. None offer access to every citizen of the world. Many specifically embargo people from other nations from using them. And 5, none can have their supply verified or audited independently. It's doubtful if even the authorities in charge actually know what the supply is that exists. So Bitcoin is the path from volatility and opaqueness to predictability and transparency. In light of all this, it is no surprise that Bitcoin is increasingly being chosen over national currencies. Bitcoin's steady and unbreakable assurances give the world a stable standard upon which its people can reliably trade with one another across any distance, in any value, and over any period of time. And this reliability is exactly what will lead to greater global economic stability. So the thesis behind this one is really, people say Bitcoin is volatile, and I say, no, it's not. and I don't just dispute it. I demonstrate that it isn't. What's volatile is the measuring stick. You're on the dollar. You're on that boat being tossed about the seas. It is wildly volatile. You cannot predict what the chairman of the Federal Reserve is going to say next Wednesday, and he's going to change things up, and the rules are going to keep changing. That's volatility. And so when you use this highly volatile thing as your yardstick, something that's quite stable may end up having the illusion of volatility. And many people aren't aware that they're being tossed about on the boat on rough seas, and that something else is there. And so what we're looking at as we see the Bitcoin price go from $1 to $50,000 is this migration of people from this migration of what? From the highly volatile system, the highly unpredictable system of fiat money to the highly stable, highly predictable system of Bitcoin. And I guess I would add very clearly, not the system of crypto, which it often gets lumped in with, which itself is highly volatile. New projects launch left, right, and center. They fail left, right, and center. Their monetary policies change left, right, and center. None of those have the stability. None of them keep their promises like Bitcoin does. So Bitcoin is the one, and the only one of these projects. It's the only option in the world that you actually have for economic stability. But you can choose it. Nobody can stop you, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, you make a lot of good points there. Clearly Bitcoin is very predictable in its supply schedule. Everything's very transparent and it's very, stable in that way. However, a lot of people are concerned, when the mass adoption comes and it does go from $1 to $50,000. People who are fiat minded see the corrections that happen. This concern kind of comes into play when Bitcoin is being used as a medium of exchange, right? A lot of people are saying that you need something more stable in order for it to be a medium of exchange, because we don't want those prices, going up and down, and one day a loaf of bread may be, X amount, and then it may be half the next day. So what do you say to that? Do you think Bitcoin is ready for being a means of exchange, or do you think it's going to take a little bit more longer for it to be ready?
I think it's ready for whoever's ready for it. Nobody's forcing anybody into it. I point out, the U.S., not in this particular article, but it doesn't take a lot of research on Google to see that the U.S. dollar has lost 95% of its purchasing power over the last 50 years. That's not exactly stable. That's like, there's famous people who have analogies of it's like a leaky pool. It's like a balloon with a hole cut out of it. Like the value leaks from the dollar and the prices do go up. And we're fed quite a bullshit line that inflation is only 2%. And we're fed an even bullshittier line that inflation is good. So if you look at important things like housing and education and many items of food, the inflation rate is actually way, way higher than 2%. So your dollar is not a good store of value. And I think it's a distraction, or it's an attempt to make people look away from the poverty of the US dollar as both a store of value and a medium of exchange. When you say, well, look, this other thing moves up and down a little bit more frequently, but if you're trying to work to save up dollars to buy a house, you're screwed. Right? And the price of the house just goes up much, much faster than you can possibly afford it. But that's okay, because the banks will just shove more money at you in a loan, because that's how they make money, and they're permitted to loan out as much money as anyone can come up with to just service the interest on. And so you become a debt slave for the rest of your life. And this is presented as a better alternative than Bitcoin. I think that's a big sham, right? And I don't know that I have to really make much of a case to defend it, but it's for the person who says honestly, because I think many of these critics are very dishonest people. They're paid by the fiat system. They're fiat economists working in fiat jobs for universities, and they're the ones who are feeding us this completely illogical line that it's good for us, that our savings are destroyed, and that our money buys less and less each year, and they tell us that that's good for us. Only a fool would believe that, and only a fool would state that. So I don't think that those people are honest, because they're probably not that foolish. But I think for people who have been mesmerized and grown up in it all their lives and don't see that there's another way, and so they are genuinely tricked by these arguments, my response to them is, take a deep breath, open your eyes, take a look. Wouldn't you prefer if your money had more and more purchasing power over time if you used it? Wouldn't it be a better world if the price of a house for you today was the same as what it was for your parents and will be the same for your children? Otherwise, we end up in a world where, for people who are just entering the housing market today, a house is unaffordable. And imagine what it'll be like for your kids. So we just have, that's an unstable system, right? That's an unsustainable, unstable system. So don't tell me that Bitcoin lacks stability when you're arguing from a position of this incredibly unstable system that requires constant intervention and flooding. And for anyone who studies it closely realizes, well, the beneficiaries of all of this intervention is the ruling class, the wealthy class, the cantillionaire class, as they're called. And it all comes at the expense of the middle class and the working class. So Bitcoin's stable and it's choosable by honest, hardworking people. And that's why the dishonest critics are freaking out, because they're losing their control over their slaves. And too bad for them, because they don't have any right to enslave anybody.
You bring up some good points there. CPI is definitely I call it a straight up scam. They're trying to tell you that you're losing about 2 to 5% a year in fiat, right? But you're really, if you look at the money supply, right, it's gone up 30-40% a year. So that's the real inflation, and people are losing value over time with fiat for sure. So do you think Bitcoin's price in terms of fiat will get more stable over time as it gets adopted and more money gets in it?
No, fiat is going to zero, so it will not be stable, right? Fiat is garbage, and it is corrupted, and we are in it, and it is potentially in its death throes right now. So no, it won't be stable. What will happen is the price of goods, as priced in Bitcoin, will continue to drop. And there will be moments in time where they may rise here and there due to legitimate reasons like shortages, which then it's a price signal that says buy a substitute, right? Because this thing is rare now, so you need to buy something else. That's what price signals are meant to do. They're not meant to be controlled by some idiot professor at some idiot university. They're meant to signal what the supply is and match it up to the demand of things. So we will see prices move around, and we will see, but the volatility will not come from the supply of currency. It will come from the supply of the goods being sold and the quantity of goods being sold and how close a substitute one is to another. So prices will forever fluctuate. It's another one of these delusional economic utopian fantasies that will never come true, to have this notion that all prices will somehow be set and will never change. This is the fallacy of price controls, and every time they've been tried, they've led to disastrous results, often shortages of essential goods like food. But will prices, prices aren't stable in dollars, right? Prices aren't stable in fiat. So why would they be stable in Bitcoin? But the good news is they're going to keep getting cheaper. So if you're able to save, don't overconsume, work to earn money and save your money, and you'll be set. And you'll be able to have a generally predictable supply of your basic needs and what wants you can afford, depending on how successful your efforts have been in earning you money.
Yeah. Bitcoin is stable when you look at when you compare it to fiat, for sure, since fiat's losing value so quickly over time, and it's guaranteed to, right? So you either take something that's guaranteed to be debased or something that's guaranteed to have a supply cap. Yeah, it makes sense to me. Right. Do you see fiat as something that's going to inevitably be corrupted and hyperinflate? And you're saying you think it's going to go to zero over time? Do you think that's going to be a quick thing?
It's just a matter of time. It's very hard to predict, when tipping point events happen. Sometimes they've already happened and people just didn't realize it. And sometimes they do happen very, very suddenly and very quickly and somewhat unpredictably. Sometimes they happen gradually, like the frog being boiled in water analogy. So that I can't say for certain. And I don't like to make price predictions and timing-based predictions, but I'd say you're living in a moment in history that's going to be seen as unique. It's the moment in history when Bitcoin was first introduced to the human race, before it has fully monetized, while fiat currencies exist. That will come to, that I'm predicting will come to an end. We will have Bitcoin as the world's global reserve currency and global currency. We won't need one that's a reserve and then have all these derivative versions of it. Everyone will just use Bitcoin or something else that's a direct proxy that's pegged to Bitcoin and is presumably incorruptible. And we can buy Bitcoin today. You won't be able to buy Bitcoin in the future. It won't make sense, because what would you buy it with? Well, Bitcoin. So it's like, how much is one Bitcoin? Well, one Bitcoin. Right? And people won't be talking about Bitcoin. They'll be talking about Satoshis, because one Bitcoin will be so valuable that it'll just seem like, ordinary people won't talk about quantities as large as one Bitcoin. So that's kind of that's a direction that we're headed in eventually. And I say, recognize what time in history you live in and act accordingly if you can see what the future is. And the future looks pretty clear to me as it relates to Bitcoin, which we'll probably get into in the next article called Why Nobody Can Stop Bitcoin.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. I think you made a pretty good case there about how Bitcoin is actually stable. So I really enjoyed that reading. Can you go on to the next one about why nobody can stop Bitcoin? Yeah.
Sure. So the next article is called Why Nobody Can Stop Bitcoin. It was written just a week before the article I just read. So we're reading them out of order, but it's okay because they weren't written to be in any kind of chronological order. And this one was published on March 25th. And it's called Why Nobody Can Stop Bitcoin. So here goes. Just about every man-made thing can be stopped somehow. We can slam on a vehicle's brakes, or at least put an obstacle in its way. We can cut a machine's power. We can order an organization stopped by the courts or the armed forces if necessary. It seems like you can stop anything with some force that counters whatever keeps that thing going. So how could a thing like Bitcoin become unstoppable? Well, Bitcoin employs two countermeasures to ever being stopped. First is flawless replicas everywhere. Bitcoin's first defense from being stopped is that you can't actually locate it. It's hard, after all, to stop something that you can't find. Now, a Bitcoin node is an instance of the Bitcoin program running on some computer, and each and every Bitcoin node is an exact replica of every other Bitcoin node in every way that matters. Each node contains all the programming necessary to run Bitcoin, along with all the information about who can spend every single bit of every Bitcoin. If someone wanted to stop Bitcoin, they'd have to stop each and every node, everywhere in the world, all at once, and keep them all stopped forever. However, Bitcoin isn't hard to run. It can operate on the simplest of computers available today. Bitcoin can also hide behind encrypted services so that nobody can see where it's running. It is impossible to find all the computers in the world running Bitcoin. If someone were hunting down Bitcoin in an attempt to shut it down, they might find some nodes, or maybe even a lot of them. But as long as Bitcoin is running somewhere on some computer, it is running for everyone and anyone that can reach that computer. And reaching a computer is pretty easy, considering the internet connects just about every computer in the world to every other one. Even if someone managed to stop every node, as soon as one of them restarted, Bitcoin would resume where it left off. If in fact someone was hunting down the world's Bitcoin nodes, any of them could go into sleep mode when the hunter came near, and thus become completely invisible until that hunter moved on to find other prey. The first thing it would do when it awoke would be to turn itself into a precise replica of all the other nodes out there that hadn't been asleep. There's tens or maybe even hundreds of thousands of nodes running everywhere, all over the world right now. There's no way to know how many Bitcoin nodes are running. That makes it impossible to even know how hard a task it would be to try to stop Bitcoin. Second is flexible energy requirements. Most things require some minimum amount of energy to operate. Bitcoin doesn't. Yes, Bitcoin uses energy. It uses energy to ensure that no node can trick any other node into becoming different from any of the others. This energy use is what prevents any node from ever mistaking which is the true record to replicate. The true record is the one with the most energy used. But exactly how much energy Bitcoin needs depends only on how much energy is actually being used. If someone managed to cut the power to even all but one of the nodes, eventually the energy requirements of Bitcoin would diminish so that just that last little node's power would be all that was needed to keep the network ticking along just fine. So Bitcoin can't be starved of the energy it needs because it can operate on very little energy if that's all it can get. So you take unfindable plus unstarvable equals unstoppable. Put it all together and you get unstoppability. Since nobody can physically find all the necessary parts they'd need to shut down Bitcoin, and nobody can starve Bitcoin of the energy it needs, nobody can stop it. There are many reasons it's important that nobody can stop Bitcoin. One is that Bitcoin itself is extremely important, and that has a link to another article. And even more importantly, you need Bitcoin to become all that you can be, which is the link to yet another article in the series. And that's the end of that article.
So clearly, Bitcoin is unstoppable, partially due to how easy it is to running a node, like you were saying. It's super easy. I just got one up using Umbrel in under a day, and that was super simple. So it's really cool to see the technology and how it's growing and how things are becoming easier and easier. Do you recommend running a node, and do you yourself run a node?
Yes, yeah? I run more than one. And I won't say how many, and I won't say where they are. So try to stop Bitcoin just by stopping me. I think it's crucial for several reasons. Just assuming that you're a Bitcoin holder, if you don't hold any Bitcoin, you're not really doing anything for your own sake by running a node. But if you do, you're verifying the blockchain yourself, and you have a copy of the record that you know is true. You don't have to take anybody else's word for it, which is another point that we made about one of its promises in the first article that we read. And it's important to understand that Bitcoin is personal responsibility money, right? Like, you can lose it, and if you lose it, nobody can bail you out, and you can verify it. And that means that it's your personal responsibility. So I think it's a personal responsibility for all holders to take possession of their coins, to learn how to do it safely, do it a little bit at a time if at first that's what you need to do, so that you know that you can spend them and move them and not lose them and have them backed up and they don't get stolen and all these kinds of rookie mistakes that you get past. But it's your own personal responsibility to run your own node. It's your own personal responsibility to hold your own coins. That's what makes this a system that can't be captured by governments or thugs or con artists. So if you want Bitcoin to do for you the things that it promises, you have to use it in a way that it can deliver those promises to you. And if you give your Bitcoins to somebody else to hold, or if you don't verify the record, then you don't know if you actually got any Bitcoins. And that's certainly where that expression, not your keys, not your coins, comes from. The other really important reason to run a node is Bitcoin's future, Bitcoin's scaling architecture is built on top of nodes. You need the core node, and then on top of that, now you can run things like the Lightning Network, and the Lightning Network needs a full node underneath it because you're running this second layer. And the Lightning Network is fantastic. It eliminates the wait times. It eliminates fees. It allows instant payment. They're constantly advancing on it. It evolves much, much, much faster than this core foundation base layer. And there's incredible things that it can already do, and there's even more incredible things that are coming. So it will be the replacement of the payments architecture, which when you were asking earlier from the first article, can Bitcoin be the medium of exchange? And part of what you need for a medium of exchange to work is, well, every transaction in the world needs to happen on it. There's millions of transactions happening with every word I speak, because there's billions of people doing business in the world. And Lightning Network, which maybe we'll discuss another time or other people can research separately, scales Bitcoin to that level by not requiring interactions on the base chain for all these lightweight transactions. And it's remarkable, and it's much, much higher scale. It's much, much higher resilience. It's much, much higher redundancy than anything else that exists in the world right now. And I know we're not going to go into it right now, but I'm saying it's more resilient and more reliable and more scalable than all the banks' technology in the world and all of the Visa and MasterCards in the world put together already. Like, the way that this system is architected is just so incredible and so contemporary because it uses the best technology that exists in the world, and it's not tied to these legacy systems and all the compliance regulations that they are forced to. It's just the best use of technology that exists to provide secure, reliable, uncheatable wealth transfer. So, so I'm going a little bit off topic, but it was just in response to why you should run a node, because you get to participate in this. And when people say you get to be your own bank, I think you get to be your own financial institution with all the responsibility that comes with it. But it's actually easy to do because all you need to do is run a node and follow the basic instructions for running a node. Make sure you have backups. Make sure you have strong passwords to protect things so that you know how to restore things if your primary piece of hardware fails. And then you've got your own money. And one of the things that, this is not my quote, but there was this meme that went around, like Bitcoin will bank all the unbanked people in the world. And I think someone came up with a much better quote, which was, no, Bitcoin will unbank all the banked people in the world. Right? You will not need to go to another institution to get all of your financial services. You can run them off of a $200 computer in your own house or wherever you choose to hide it.
Yeah, I like that. It will unbank the banked, actually. Yeah. That's a cool way of putting it. Mm-hmm. Well, Bitcoin does have a big bounty on it in the sense that, there's a big incentive to stop this because it threatens the money printer, right? The whole fiat system it threatens in the long run. Do you, is there any concerns that you have in terms of, governments waging bigger attacks? And do you think that's going to happen? Do you think there'll be a big filter event of some sort?
No, I don't. I think first of all, when we look at the history of Bitcoin as, and I would say there's another article in this series that is closely related to this one, which is called Why Everything That Should Hurt Bitcoin Actually Makes It Stronger. I think that's what its title is. It's something very close to that. And it really is a companion to this because it describes how, as you said, Bitcoin has a big bounty on its head. It's $700 or $800 billion right now. If you can destroy Bitcoin, if you can exploit something about Bitcoin, and nobody's ever managed to exploit anything about it, if you can do it, you better move fast because someone else might figure it out and they'll do the exploiting. Or somebody else might figure it out and fix and patch it so that you can't do the exploiting. So get out there and do it. And Bitcoin is out there right now, every single minute of every single day, operating, and go ahead and attack it if you can. And there's 7 billion people on this earth who can all attack it all this time right now, including and millions of corporations and hundreds of governments with all of their security institutions, everything. It's there. Why have we not seen it attacked? Well, I'm sure people have been trying to figure out how to attack it. And this is part of the incredible achievement of what Bitcoin is. Here it is, standing out there with no offense, only its defense of its architecture, and nobody's been able to stop it. And there's not only an incentive to try to stop it, but to try to stop it as fast as you can because you want to get ahead of the next guy who figures out the same thing that you did because the source code is all open. Everything's out there. So anyone who can figure out how to stop it should try to stop it right away, right? They should short Bitcoin and try to stop it and become one of the richest people on earth. And nobody can do it. And nobody has been able to do it. And every second that we speak that Bitcoin keeps on running is more proof that nobody in the world, including the biggest governments, can figure it out. So just as a first thing to people who are new to Bitcoin and who just say, well, the government can stop anything. Well, the government can't stop anything. Let's also give our heads a shake. Name one thing that the government has stopped, including things that it started that it said it was going to stop, like the income tax, or like the government can't really stop anything. The government can make things very inconvenient to use. It can throw some people in jail for using some things as it did in its war on drugs. But the war on drugs has a winner, and the winner was drugs. The government lost. The government failed to stop drugs. It was probably a very ill-conceived war. It shouldn't have been a war, but we're not here to talk about those bad decisions. We're just talking about people who think governments can stop things I challenge them to say, show me something that the government has stopped. The government can't really stop anything, but people think it has the power to do it. It hasn't stopped crime. It hasn't stopped wars. It hasn't stopped people abusing each other. It hasn't stopped people being mean to each other. It hasn't stopped poverty. It hasn't stopped all these claims. It hasn't stopped illiteracy. So the government can't stop it can't stop the absence of things. It can't stop the presence of things. It's a very limited institution. And so if you think it can stop Bitcoin, which is built to be really, really, really rugged, I'd be more concerned about one smart hacker than the whole government being able to stop something in this realm, in this digital realm. But people tend to think, well, the government will outlaw it, so people will stop using it. And say, okay, well, give me an example in history where the government outlawed something and people actually stopped using it. And they'll say, well, they'll make it really inconvenient. I don't want to use it if the government outlaws. I won't use it if the government outlaws it. So, okay, well, so we're not talking about the government stopping Bitcoin now. We're talking about you stopping using Bitcoin because you've been ordered to, because you comply with what the government says rather than you resist. And that takes us down a whole other avenue. I still would argue. So we were in agreement that Bitcoin isn't stopped. We're just in agreement that you are complying to not use Bitcoin because you're not interested in defending your freedom. I mean, I don't mean to be too snarky about it, but if you just comply with anything the government says, you're not a free person. You are a compliant slave, and it's a hard truth to confront. If you say, I will obey any law that's passed to me, and then you say, well, maybe I'll do it within reason. And you'll say, well, maybe I'll do it because I'll do it in the case of Bitcoin because I don't think Bitcoin's important enough. You say, okay, well, that's your choice. But that's your choice, and Bitcoin doesn't stop. And if the discussion is, can anybody stop Bitcoin? My answer is still no, nobody can stop it.
If you obey every rule and you try to follow every law that comes into existence, that's basically impossible, right? There's laws being added every day.
Yeah, you can't even read the laws. You don't even know all the laws you have to obey, and I'm sure many are contradictory. So in obeying one, you're breaking another.
Yeah, I hear that the average person breaks, I forget, like 3 felonies or something a day. So
wow,
but there's just so many insane laws though, and they never take any down, right? They're always adding more.
They never do,
right?
They never do.
Yeah.
Although they say they will, and so we're at this age where it's kind of reached epic, ludicrous proportions, and we do need to take our freedom back. We need to reassert it. And some people have written some really lovely essays about how Bitcoin is a peaceful revolution. Nick Carter has an article called "Bitcoin: A Most Peaceful Revolution," and I really urge everyone to read it because we've never had this option in the past. We've either had to continue to see governments increase in oppression until there's some state of collapse, which leads to a revolution, which is often bloody and violent. And so it's bad followed by bad to get to good. And here we have something peaceful and good to get to good. So it's a historic, unprecedented type of revolutionary technology, which is nonviolent, bloodless, peaceful. And so it really is a very extraordinary gift that we have access to in all of human history at a time when we need it. We need it because things are getting out of control.
If one country makes Bitcoin illegal through legislation, can you kind of walk through exactly what you think will happen and what has happened if that's already happened?
The countries where it's most used are the countries where it's illegal, right? Like, because I think in Nigeria, they've cracked down on it. And Nigeria is, if not the single highest usage rate of Bitcoin amongst its population, then it's in the top 2. So why does that happen? And China's made Bitcoin illegal numerous times on and off. And we actually ended up with most mining in the world down there. And then recently China essentially made Bitcoin mining illegal and was able to stop the Bitcoin mining in that country. And so the consequence was the mining happened elsewhere, right? Because Bitcoin is global, if you shut it down, if you manage to shut it down in a small geographic part of the world, even a large geographic part of the world, it continues to operate everywhere. And anyone who can connect to it, even within the region where it's alleged to be shut down, experiences the same Bitcoin that everybody else in the world does, because it's uncorruptible. Because it's verifiable and you can connect to the chain and it's being broadcast from satellites in space. So as much as you say it's shut down, like the radio signals with the binary file that constitutes the whole of Bitcoin is raining down upon us all the time. And anyone with the equipment to pick up that signal anywhere, even in the middle of a forest, can run Bitcoin. So it's really like, it's just, you can't touch it. You can't see it. It's ethereal, which is ironic. It is spiritual in a sense, right? It covers everything. And so it's not helpful for a country, and it's certainly not effective for a country to shut it down, right? Like, countries have maybe even had more success in attempting to shut down other things, which they've been unsuccessful at. But here is something that is not even material. So you can't wage war on it. You can't drop a bomb on Bitcoin. It's everywhere in the world all at once. You can't launch a chemical attack on it. You can't launch a biological attack on it. You can't launch, there's just no attack that can take Bitcoin down, which is what I was just trying to get at the base of in this article. I mean, this is a very simple article, and if you talk to the cryptographers and the developers and the architects who are always working on Bitcoin, they're trying to think of every single thing that can possibly take it down. And if they ever come up with something, they patch it rather than exploit it. But I think again, a lot of people who are naive come in and say, "Oh wait, I've got it. I figured out what can shut down Bitcoin," which is cute and it's kind of funny. And I've had this conversation with a bunch of people, and I say, "Oh, let me go to Twitter and tell everybody some guy on the internet has figured out that Bitcoin can be stopped." And it's like, no, like unless you're coming to me with a PhD in system security and encryption and everything, you almost certainly haven't come up with anything that hasn't been thought of 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times or 10 million times and addressed. You're just naive as to what's been explored because you're new to the space, which is fine, but just don't presume that all the millions of people who've been involved in this for over 10 years now haven't thought of what you just came up with after only being introduced to Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all part of the learning experience. I've encountered a lot of people like that too. And I try to, remain calm and just tell them,
Right.
like debunk the FUD, in a short and easy to understand explanation. Yeah. So if we can get into the next article here about why Bitcoin is not like anything you've ever seen before.
This is actually, this is my favorite article from the whole series, my personal favorite. And there's quite a few that I really like. They're all my children, and everyone says you love them more, but you just love one or two more than others. I actually have one called Why Bitcoin is Worthy of Being Loved, which is probably my second favorite. But it's not necessarily for everyone. This one is for everyone. And this one I wrote on April 10th, and it's really short. It's called Why Bitcoin is Not Like Anything You've Ever Seen Before. And it begins with a quote. It says, "Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away." And it's by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. So let me read it. Bitcoin is so different from anything we've ever seen before that it is helpful to newcomers to first show them what it is not. In doing so, we often use words that are the opposite of ones we typically use to describe things we are familiar with. Bitcoin is not like any organization that anyone has ever encountered before. Bitcoin is missing a lot of features we see in just about every organization. Bitcoin has no leader, no employees, no headquarters, no center of operations, no government, no rulers of any type, no elections, no location, no physical or intellectual property, no assets, and no money. It is not even incorporated or legally constituted in any manner anywhere on Earth. Bitcoin's design rejects all these common features of organizations. Bitcoin sees these features not only as unnecessary, but as undesirable. This is because it recognizes that each is a vulnerability. Bitcoin deals with such vulnerabilities by not having them in the first place. If any of these features were in Bitcoin, it could lead to Bitcoin halting, being taken over, becoming corrupted, or being destroyed. By removing them, Bitcoin becomes unstoppable, uncontrollable, incorruptible, and indestructible. By eliminating all vulnerabilities, Bitcoin becomes invulnerable. These intentional omissions are the genius in its design, which makes Bitcoin valuable and indispensable. What then is Bitcoin? If Bitcoin isn't any of these things, what then is it? Bitcoin is a mechanism organizing people and computers to make one unerasable digital document. And unerasable is also known by the fancier terms immalleable or immutable. The document it creates is a record of its own history. It can only be added to over time, not edited nor erased. The record's past is preserved beneath layer upon layer of proof of the energy used in creating it. Erasing any recent records requires so much energy as to be impractical, and erasing older ones is effectively impossible. There's even more that Bitcoin doesn't do. Bitcoin doesn't keep track of the identities of the people or the machines that use it. This makes it permissionless. It doesn't increase the supply of Bitcoins to meet demand, making it deflationary and inviolate. It doesn't force itself on anyone, making it consensual. It doesn't exclude anyone from using it, making it inclusive. Bitcoin sets out to do one thing and one thing only, to be the best money that humankind has ever had and will ever have, and it is uncompromising in its singular mission. In being this, Bitcoin makes possible a much brighter future for humankind and the earth. And that's the end of the article. There's a few links to other stories that elaborate on many of these words and points in the article if people go to it, all of which are like these other 3-minute articles. But I find it really, really helpful to start. When I teach courses on Bitcoin, I start with this article and I start with these ideas, like clean your mind of all the assumptions. People start with thinking, well, it's a company, or it has shares in it, or it must have a leader, or it must have a head office, or somebody I can talk to. And it's like, it's so original and so unique. There is no employee of Bitcoin. If you screw up, if you don't like it, there's no complaints department. There's no customer service department. There's no marketing department. There's no investors. There's no owners. Bitcoin is not owned. The institutions, like anyone can participate and anyone can leave, but nobody can own it. If the definition of ownership is the ability to dispose of or transfer ownership, like you can own the Bitcoins within the network, but you can't own Bitcoin, the network itself.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. It really kind of shakes things up. People who don't fully understand it probably get a mind-blowing experience from reading something like that. I like the ending when you say that, it's a brighter future for humankind, and Bitcoin just has one purpose, to be the best money possible. So do you think Bitcoin is the most groundbreaking technology in our lifetimes in terms of what it brings to humanity?
Absolutely. Unquestionably, undeniably, we've not seen anything like this. It's such an incredible revolution. I've written another article recently that's kind of a fun take to look at what it does. It makes it such an incredible technology. And I think the article is called Why People Wonder if Bitcoin is Alien Technology. Because it does these things that are so unlike anything else that have ever come before it. And that article kind of goes through this. And there's another part. If you go and if you like listening, I've recorded my reading of that article on a podcast called The Dumbest Guy in the Room, but you can find it in my deep takes on my Medium. I was just speaking to listeners here who are interested. But like Bitcoin does things that no other human invention has ever done. It's self-replicating, it's self-adjusting, it's self-correcting. It's built to last not for like 10 or 20 or 30 years without maintenance. It's built to last for billions of years without any maintenance. Like who builds these sorts of things? Well, no human who's ever come before. So, when people study it and they look at it and they say, wow, it's unbreakable, it's unstoppable, it's going to run forever, it can adjust itself and it won't let anybody else take control of it or adjust it. Like, people invariably get to this conclusion. They say, like, could Satoshi Nakamoto have been an alien or, some other kind of being? Because I just don't see any human being who's created anything like this before. So it's an invention that's so extraordinary and unique from anything we've really seen before. That's why someone needed to write an article that said it's not like anything you've ever seen before. It's not something 2.0. it's something 1.0, and it also resists having a 2.0 of it made, because there's only 21 million Bitcoin. There's an infinite number of shitcoins, right? Like there's no limit to how many altcoins can be created, but Bitcoin can only be created once. And it was only created once, and it was created kind of in this very beautiful and perfect way, which included its creator not seeking its creator gifting it to the world, right? Like Satoshi did not seek personal fame. Nobody knows who he is, if he's human. He doesn't get people slapping on the street going, way to go. So he doesn't get fame. He doesn't get power, right? Because he's disappeared. So he can't pull the strings. He can't manipulate. He can't control it, which is not true of any other crypto or fiat currency, right? They all have their rulers who change the rules as they go along, often, unsurprisingly, to suit their interests. And he doesn't have any wealth, right? He didn't do this for the money, because he's never touched any of his coins other than one transaction where he sent Hal Finney 10 coins and Hal sent them back to him. But that's it. And I think it's safe to say that Satoshi's gone and won't be moving those coins and won't be spending those coins, and did not do this for the money. Right, so didn't do it for the money, didn't do it for the power, didn't do it for the fame. So egoless in this creation, which again none of these other projects have. We know who their rulers are. That makes them seizable. That makes them corruptible, either through influencing the leader or through the leader's own human frailties and fallibilities. And so there's only one Bitcoin, and there's only one thing like Bitcoin. These other things that claim to be like Bitcoin, if a person's making an honest claim, then that claim is honest but mistaken, and typically they're not honest claims. That person knows that what they've done isn't Bitcoin. It's an attempt to trick other people into thinking that they have something allegedly better than Bitcoin, but it isn't.
I get you on that. So with Bitcoin as an incorruptible money that you were saying, supposed to be the base layer of our new financial system. With this new incorruptible money that Bitcoin is, do you see corruption not just at the base layer, but corruption everywhere as going down, and people not being able to, get that newly created fiat money? So there's just going to be a less corrupt world in general. Is that yes. How you see it?
I do. I think that's a wonderful thing. It doesn't end human fallibility. Humans can still make mistakes, but it ends a lot of incentives to choose immorality, to choose corruptibility, right? If you can't seize control of the money supply, if you can't print more dollars or, more currency units and give them to yourself, you're not going to dedicate a lot of your energy to trying to do that, which is what a lot of people do in this world today, right? There's a lot of people who are trying to pull off scams, who are trying to cheat, who are trying to lie, who are trying to get elected, who are trying to, on false promises. There's not going to be any when the dust settles and the Bitcoin civilization is here, it'll be the rare person who really goes out of their way to try to be dishonest and think that they're going to have success at it. And I think a great example is the case of anyone who's come around pretending to be Satoshi, right? Like, again, there might, like, first of all, you can't go, if you are, just go ahead and spend the coins. Like, there you go. Like, you've got all the wealth, right? And if you spend the coins, then you've got all the fame, because everyone will say, yep, I guess you're them. And presumably a bunch of people will give you some power. But anyone who comes along just gets laughed at, right? And we see the difference between, and I want to contrast that against somebody who comes forward in the realm of politics and says, I can fix all your problems, right? I'm the wise politician. I've got a platform. It's got all these points and it's going to solve all your problems. And it's BS, right? They never succeed, right? They never solve any of the problems that they say they would. The problems typically only get worse. We find out that they're corrupt. They're doing terrible things. They're involved with terrible people. They are, whether they're doing it knowingly or fooled, there's all this fallibility. And again, one of the things that's important that we see that Bitcoin doesn't have is it doesn't have fallible human beings in roles where if they were corrupted or failed, the system would be corrupted or would fail. Bitcoin solves this problem by removing people from it. It's all like, I have another article that says that Bitcoin's the most inclusive institution in the world, and it says that we have this problem. Inclusivity is wonderful, but people are prejudiced. They make mistakes. They're fallible, and so Bitcoin solves the problem of inclusivity by removing people from the decision of who can use it. It just lets anyone in the world use it. And now the problem of inclusivity is solved. There's no corrupt person who harbors prejudice able to stop anybody. And lo and behold, it's the most inclusive institution in the world. So, I mean, these are remarkable inventions. And I think that quote that I start this article with, that perfection is achieved not when you've bloated everything with every feature you can think of, but we've actually removed everything that can get in the way of the smooth operation of this thing towards the goal that you have. And all of this comes around, right? Every one of these articles, we can now see they're actually talking about the same thing, right? When I talk about Bitcoin stability, I say it made a promise that everyone in the world can use it. And when I talk about inclusivity, it delivers on a problem it delivers on a promise, which is that everyone in the world can use it. And it's not like anything else in the world, because it succeeds in being inclusive by removing the exclusive human beings from it. So all of these things are the same, but when you start to look at it in all these different shapes and angles, you realize, wow, this is a really extraordinary and unique thing. And I can see it from all these different perspectives. And that's what I really aim to try to do with this whole Why Bitcoin series. And I think then when I've written some other articles about it, they've been looks at it from a much more sophisticated angle, a much harder angle to look at things. Those articles are not 3 minutes long. They're 10, maybe the longest one's 20 minutes, but most of them are 10 to 15 minutes long. Some are only 8 minutes. And they take on slightly more challenging topics. But so I would say, for any of your listeners who want to read my work, you can read the Why Bitcoin stuff really quickly, even though it's 25 articles, and then read some of the other stuff a little more slowly. But the stuff about you're asking about corruption, and I'm sorry that I've gone off on a bunch of things. I think we're going to end up with a much less corrupt group. And I have, it's nice to have written all these articles because I can point people to them rather than have to tell the whole hypothesis here. But I have one article that I called Rich or Poor Bitcoiners Have What Money Can't Buy. And I talk about the process of becoming a Bitcoiner, which is you have to study all of these things. So like all these things that we're talking about, you have to learn them and study them. And I talk about there are things that money can't buy. It can't buy intelligence. It can't buy integrity. It can't buy love. It can't buy friendship. And again, it's only a 4-minute read, so I'd encourage people to read it. But I point out how the process of becoming a Bitcoiner actually gives you, it's like a training to give you these things that money can't buy. And so whether you have a lot of Bitcoin or not, by the time you actually become a Bitcoiner with conviction, you've trained yourself to have integrity, to have intelligence, and to be worthy of having real friends who share those virtues. So it's a pretty extraordinary thing. And you won't be corrupt, right? Like once you understand this, and you understand that there's no point in being corrupt, and you understand that you can add so much value to the world by creating value and trading it for the value that other people create, rather than being in some dog-eat-dog world where he who tells the biggest lie and wins the election gets all the wealth and all the power, you'll be much more motivated to be moral than to play some immoral game that involves corruption.
Yeah. Bitcoin is quite the idea to get your head around. There's a lot of aspects to learn about it, and I really do like your writings. I think they put it in the easy to understand explanations, and the Why Bitcoin series that you were mentioning is really really great because I like the short form content. I think that's a great way to get new people into the space and understanding everything about Bitcoin. For sure. Yeah,
maybe I'll make one last point, which is Bitcoiners talk about low time preference, right? Being able to take your time with things, not hurrying. And so that's why Bitcoin series, by being short, can appeal to pre-coiners, but people who haven't developed their low time preference yet. They come in, they're like, I just wanted the answer. Show me why Bitcoin can't be stopped, or show me why I should choose Bitcoin, which is great. And so that's why I've given you all these bite-sized, tweet-sized articles. And hopefully when you've read them, you get curious enough and you feel your time preference lowering, your long-term horizon. Be prepared. And then you can read some of mine and lots of other people's longer form pieces that really take you deeper into these topics and give you the nuance that exists within them and gives you the understanding and motivates you to become a Bitcoiner, which is someone who not just holds a bunch of Bitcoin with any, and maybe thinks about selling them for dollars in some day, but someone who understands that this is a one-way trade, that you're buying Bitcoin to enter into a new form of society, a new form of civilization, one that's free of a lot of the corruption and problems that our civilization has. And we have to be honest and critical about what it is that ails our society, or we can't actually improve it.
Thanks a lot for reading that article. I really enjoyed it. This brand new technology is something completely different we've ever seen. How can people find out more about you and read your articles and whatnot online? Well,
I hope in the show notes you've got links to my Medium and my Twitter pages. Tomer Strolight, which is TomerStrolight. So I'm at Tomer Strolight on Twitter. I'm tomerstrolight.medium.com on Medium. That's where you'll find 99% of my stuff. And everything that I do, I try to make it findable through Medium. I use Medium as my index page, and everything new that I do, I promote on Twitter. And I tweet very regularly, like several times a day, just thoughts that occur in my head, and I retweet other thoughts that I find that other people have had that are really good. And you can find out what that implies in an article. My most challenging article to read for people who are really ambitious is called "Why Bitcoin" or "How Bitcoin is like a giant cybernetic meta brain." And I point out that Bitcoin can actually think because it uses us as neurons inside of its meta brain, and that is kind of this mind-blowing conjecture of mine, which I don't think I've proven, but it's an interesting speculative idea to discuss. And so people are welcome to go down that route if they feel that they've got enough understanding of Bitcoin that they want to consider some of these more challenging out there ideas.
All right, awesome. Well, yeah, I'll definitely link your Twitter and your Medium in the show notes. So if anyone wants to go down that rabbit hole, they can. And I definitely do recommend your reading. So thanks a lot for coming on and discussing those 3 articles, Tomer.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Matt. It's been a pleasure.